On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County, I would like to welcome you to the last Zoom meeting on the November election. My name is Lyn Widmyer, and with me today on Monday, November 30th, is Nikki Painter, Chief Election Clerk for Jefferson County. Today, we're going to chat with Nikki and ask her thoughts about how the election went in terms of having to deal with so many absentee ballots and such a large turnout. Nikki, thank you again for joining us and for making yourself so available for these chats. Could you just start off by reviewing the numbers from the election, how many people voted in person, by mail, and your thoughts on how it compares to other years?
Sure. So thank the League for having me again. I appreciate this. I think I've received good feedback from our previous video, so hopefully this one will be received as well as the others. So for the 2020 general election, we did see over 3,000 more people than have ever voted in our elections before. So we did have a very large increase in the number of people participating. Voter turnout was 65%. And while that is in line with the past general election, presidential elections, the number, because we have more registered voters now and we had a higher turnout. So the percentage looks about the same as previous elections, but we did have more voter turnout. So we had total in the entire election, 27,945 Jefferson County residents cast their ballot in this election. That's a huge turnout. Again, over 3,000 more that we've had in the past. Comparing that to the 2016 general election, only 24,000 ballots were cast. In 2008, which we all thought the numbers were going to be very similar, the percentages, to the 2008 general election. That one we had a little over 22,000 registered voters. And we had a 66% turnout that election, but again, only 22,000 voters turned out for that one. So this one with our almost 28,000 registered voter turnout, this was a huge election.
Did the number of mail-in ballots pose any problems for you? How many were mail-in ballots, and did you have security issues with so many mail-in ballots that you didn't have in previous elections?
Well, in this election, we had 6,217 people vote by absentee. I will say that the majority of those came in person. Most people physically walked their ballot into our office. For whatever reason, maybe not trusting the mail system, just wanted to ensure that their ballot was here and it was safe. I'm not really sure, but the majority of those were cast by the voters bringing their ballot into our office. We did not have any security issues. I understand that there were several social media posts and questions about when people would bring their ballots in, that we were just laying them on our desk. There's a process that we have to go through, and it wasn't a security issue. It was, before those ballots can be put into a locked box, they have to be checked in as received. If we're dealing with hundreds of people, and at some points we even had lines outside of our door just to get people in here, because even though they were voting absentee because of the pandemic, we still had to try to keep our staff safe as well. So we were limiting how many people could come in. So we had lines at certain points with people trying to come into our office to drop off their ballot. We would have to put them to the side to help the next person. And then all of those ballots would be checked in. We had different bins that we were putting them in for mail-in, in person, and then they were all locked into a secure lockbox before we ever left at the end of the night. So everything was completely secure, and there was a process for it that we had to go through to ensure that people could then go back and check to make sure that their ballot was received and that they were received in a timely manner. So there was a process, and I understand people's concerns because this election, I think, had everybody on heightened alert to make sure that everything was handled on the up and up. But I can promise you that the Jefferson County Voter Registration Office, we all take our jobs extremely seriously, and we handled those ballots with care that they needed to be handled with. So.
Thank you. The Jefferson County Commission sits as the Board of Canvassers, and reviews all the ballot results by precinct after the election. And in many cases, and I know this as a former county commissioner, there are ballots that we have to decide whether the county commission has to decide whether to include or not, like people who voted in the wrong precinct or people who weren't registered in the county at all, but still insisted on voting. Did you have an uptick in those types of ballots this time, or was it?
It was about average. If we look at the numbers, obviously the numbers would be more, but we had more people voting. But it was essentially the same that we have in every election. There really weren't any huge numbers of these contested ballots or ballots that couldn't be counted. It was all, our canvass, luckily enough, was very smooth. It was not a lot of issues that needed to be brought up that were different than any other election previous. So we really didn't see a huge issue with challenged ballots.
And let me, we really, the focus of this little session with you is to spend most of the time hearing your thoughts on what do you think worked really well this election, and knowing that we will have upcoming elections, what needs improvements, or what areas would you look into to improve?
Well, I mean, overall, I think with the pandemic in the middle of, the COVID restrictions and trying to keep everyone safe. We had poll workers out, we had our staff out, we had voters, we were trying to keep everyone safe. That added a whole nother layer to this election that hopefully we won't have to deal with in the future. But if we do, there are ways that I think maybe having a separate early voting location, although our location has been sufficient for other elections, it was this one, everyone was seeing record turnout nationwide. Everybody had lines, right? I think there were even some states, like in New York, they had a drum line come down and entertain the voters that had been standing in line for so long. So that wasn't a unique situation to us, but obviously we don't want to see people waiting in line, because that may cause some people not to be able to wait in line. They have to go to work, they have other obligations. So, trying to figure out how to reduce the lines, although I think that was really, with this election, the huge turnout and the emphasis that was on this election. You couldn't go to Walmart without seeing something about, the election. Even on the freezer doors, it was saying, register to vote, make sure you're registered to vote. So, that needs to be discussed. Some of our locations, although they have served us well in the past, may need looked at again if we're going to continue to have the type of turnout that we've had in this election. There were some parking issues at some of them. No real issues with being able to get into the facilities, mostly just parking issues, just because of the sheer number of people that were showing up. And then a lot of people showed up first thing in the morning, but by the end of the day, our lines had dwindled. So it's just going to be, after this election, trying to figure out what was caused just because of this election and the record turnout and the COVID restrictions and having to have everything spaced out and reduce the number of machines that we typically send out. All of that played a part in this election. So we just have to figure out what played that part, and then what maybe needs to look at, like locations, or if the county commission chooses to open a second voting location, where would that be? And how are we going to staff it? How are we going to make sure it's secure? I think some other people were comparing us to other counties that had several locations, and those locations you can't just set those up right before an election. There's a long process that has to go through. So a lot of counties have multiple early voting locations that take them a long time, their residents a long time to get to their voting location. So it's not in here in Jefferson County, 20 minutes you can be anywhere in the county. Their counties take a little bit longer, and their infrastructure is not as developed as ours is. So we're just kind of looking at those things. We're still in the process of going over what happened during the election, what needs to change maybe, and what can be changed.
Would you like to give a shout out to any of your staff or the people who helped you run this election, which did run very smoothly?
Thank you. Our staff, we have a very small staff. So we have in our elections office, it is myself, Sean and Heather. Those two ladies were the ones taking the ballots. They were, on the front line dealing with the people that were walking in and handling all of that. Our poll workers, we have some of the best poll workers in the state. Our poll workers really stepped up. We had a lot of new people for this election because our older generation just didn't want to put themselves in that risk. They were out exposing themselves, and they just couldn't do it. So we had a lot of young people step up this election, and hopefully that continues in future elections, and we can continue to see that younger turnout. But our poll workers are great. I couldn't have done it without our poll workers and our staff. And because of the number of absentee ballots, we have a small staff. So it took our entire office. We had everyone from our finance office, from our probate office, from our front office, everybody. If you were here, you were stuffing an envelope, or you were making packets, or you were cutting directions out, something. So you were doing something election related, even if that wasn't in your job description. It was all hands on deck. So I appreciate our entire staff that stepped up and really helped us out and got us through this election.
Well, Nikki, that sort of ends. We just wanted to give you a chance to give us a review on the election. Do you have anything else you want to say or comment on?
No, I appreciate everyone that showed up and gave us patience and grace. We had a lot of compliments. We had people were sending us pizzas that we didn't even know where they came from. We had pizzas that showed up during early voting. And I just appreciate people just giving us that patience and grace that I think everyone needed to get through this election. And I appreciate the League of Women Voters for having me for these different videos and helping us spread the word on what needed to be done with the absentees, how to process those, and this wrap up. So I appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Nikki, for all the work that obviously you and your staff have done to make this election work. And thank you in particular for being so willing to share with us on Zoom tips and hints and procedures that people were very interested in learning so they could vote in this election. Before signing off, I would like to recognize League of Women Voter member Terry Thorson, who behind the scenes is managing the Zoom meeting. This technology is beyond me, and thankfully for the League of Women Voters, Terry knows all about it. This interview will be posted at our League website, lwv-jcwv.org. Thank you again, Nikki. I can't express our thanks enough for all you did, and particularly on this election. So this concludes our recording, and thank you all for listening in.